People like you don't walk into this bank carrying a $3 million check.
The words echoed across the marble lobby before anyone had a chance to pretend they hadn't heard them. Several customers looked up. A security guard paused halfway through signing a delivery log. The young teller at the next window froze with her hands above the keyboard. The man standing at window 3 didn't answer right away.
If you're planning some kind of scam, you picked the wrong branch.
He simply looked down at the torn pieces of paper drifting toward the polished floor. One piece landed against the toe of his worn brown shoe. Another slid beneath the counter. The woman behind the glass folded her arms as if she had just won an argument. She looked satisfied. The man slowly bent, and when he stood up, he spoke calmly.
This moment.
Oh, I will.
No.
He gave the slightest shake of his head.
You won't.
You'll wish you could forget it.
The smile disappeared
So now
from
you're
her face.
threatening me?
She pointed
I'm
toward the
making an
front doors.
observation.
Leave.
He didn't move. He glanced toward the security officer, then back
Leave
at
now
her.
or be escorted out.
Please.
Call them now.
And while you're at it, ask them to notify your regional director.
Why would someone like him come here for you?
14 minutes later, the
He won't
same
be coming
manager
for me.
would be standing
He'll be
in
coming
complete
because of you.
silence, watching her own supervisor walk straight past her, extend his hand, and say only 2 words.
Good afternoon, sir.
By then, no one in the bank would be laughing anymore. But to understand why, you have to go back to the beginning. The man's name was Elijah Brooks. He was 64 years old. His hair had turned silver years ago, though he never bothered trying to hide it. His jackets were always clean, never fashionable. The cuffs had softened with age. The elbows showed years of careful use. His shoes had been polished that morning, not because anyone would notice, because his father had once told him, if you respect yourself, you'll never need expensive clothes to prove it. Elijah had never forgotten those words. He drove the same pickup truck he'd owned for nearly 18 years. The paint had faded under thousands of afternoons in the sun. One headlight was newer than the other. The radio only worked if you held the dial halfway between 2 stations. He never replaced it. It still got him where he needed to go. That Thursday afternoon, he parked outside Riverside Community Bank with a leather document case resting on the passenger seat. Inside, folded neatly inside a clear protective sleeve, was a certified check worth exactly $3 million. It wasn't lottery money. It wasn't inheritance money. It wasn't compensation from a lawsuit. It was the final payment for a manufacturing company Elijah had quietly built over 35 years before selling it to a national corporation. Very few people knew his name. That was exactly how he preferred it. He had spent decades avoiding attention. No flashy watches, no luxury cars, no interviews, no social media. While other people chased applause, Elijah chased consistency. Every employee who had ever worked for him received fair wages. Every supplier got paid early. Every promise was kept. He believed reputation traveled farther than advertising. That belief had made him wealthy, not overnight, but one ordinary day after another. As he stepped out of his truck, he looked at the check one last time. $3 million. To him, it wasn't life-changing money anymore. It was simply the last page of a very long chapter. He planned to deposit it, drive home, water the tomatoes growing behind his small brick house, and meet his granddaughter after school like he did every Thursday. It should have been the simplest errand of his week. Instead, it would become the afternoon that changed several lives forever. As Elijah stepped through the revolving doors of Riverside Community Bank, the cool air washed over him. The lobby was busy. Customers waited in neat lines. A television mounted near the ceiling played a financial news channel that no one seemed to be watching. The faint smell of fresh coffee drifted from a small refreshment station near the entrance. It looked like any other Thursday afternoon. Ordinary, predictable, the kind of place where people deposited paychecks, signed mortgage papers, and hurried back to work. Elijah smiled politely at an elderly couple walking toward the exit. The man nodded back. Then Elijah made his way to the customer service counter. A young teller looked up. She couldn't have been older than 25. Her name tag read Natalie. "Good afternoon, sir," she said with a warm smile. "How can I help you today?" "I'd like to deposit a certified check." "Certainly." She extended both hands. Elijah carefully removed the protective sleeve from his leather folder and slid the check across the counter. Natalie's eyes widened for just a moment. $3 million. She blinked once to make sure she had read it correctly. Then she smiled again. "I'll just need my branch manager to authorize anything of this size." "Of course." She picked up the check carefully and disappeared through a glass door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Elijah waited quietly. He looked around the lobby. A little boy sat beside his mother, counting coins from a small piggy bank. Across the room, a construction worker in a dusty orange vest filled out paperwork with rough hands that showed years of hard labor. Near the entrance, An elderly woman struggled to open her handbag while searching for her glasses. Without thinking, Elijah walked over. "May I?" She smiled. "If you don't mind." He gently unfastened the clasp she couldn't reach. "There you are." "Oh, thank you. My husband usually helps me with these." Elijah smiled. "I'm sure he'd tell you I just saved the day." She laughed softly. "So would I." He returned to the counter. It was a tiny moment. Most people barely noticed, but Natalie did. From inside the manager's office, she watched through the glass. She smiled to herself. 5 minutes later, the office door swung open. Out stepped Diane Whitmore, the branch manager. She was impeccably dressed. Every strand of hair was perfectly in place. She walked with the confidence of someone who believed she was always the smartest person in the room. Natalie handed her the certified check. "I've already confirmed it's a certified instrument," she said quietly. Diane barely listened. Her eyes had already moved past the check to the man waiting beside the counter. She looked him up and down. The faded jacket, the worn leather folder, the scuffed shoes, the old pickup truck still visible through the front windows. Her expression changed almost instantly. Professional courtesy disappeared. Suspicion took its place. She walked to the counter without introducing herself. "This yours?" Elijah nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She held the check between two fingers. "And where exactly did you get $3 million? The question wasn't curious. It was accusatory. A few customers glanced over. Elijah answered without hesitation. "I sold my business." "What business?" "A manufacturing company." "What kind of manufacturing?" "Industrial equipment." Diane tilted her head. "You expect me to believe that?" "I expect you to verify it." For the first time, something in Elijah's calm voice unsettled her. Not enough to stop, just enough to make her defensive. She looked back at the check, then at Elijah again. "You have identification." He reached into his wallet and handed over his driver's license. She examined it, turned it over, held it beneath the light, then placed it on the counter. "Anything else?" Without a word, Elijah handed her a second form of identification. She looked at that one too, her lips pressed into a thin line. "These don't prove where this money came from. They prove who I am. They prove someone printed those cards." A murmur spread through the lobby. A man, standing behind Elijah, whispered to the customer beside him. $3 million? Sounds suspicious. His companion nodded. "Scammers are getting bolder every year." The words reached Elijah's ears. He didn't react. He simply placed both hands lightly on the counter and waited. Years earlier, his father had stood beside him outside a grocery store after a cashier falsely accused them of using counterfeit money. Young Elijah had been furious. His fists clenched. His face burned with embarrassment. But his father had rested a gentle hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Son, when someone decides your worth before they know your name, anger won't change their mind." He paused before adding, "Character will." The memory lasted only a heartbeat. Then Elijah was back in the bank. Diane slid the identification cards back toward him. "I'm not accepting this." Natalie's eyes widened. "Diane, it's a certified?" "I know exactly what it is." Her sharp tone silenced the young teller. Then, without another word, Diane gripped the check with both hands. Several people watched, confused. Elijah's eyes never left hers. One sharp pull. The paper split down the middle. A second pull, then another. The certified check fell apart into jagged pieces that fluttered onto the polished floor like confetti. Gasps rippled across the lobby. Natalie covered her mouth. The elderly woman Elijah had just helped stared in disbelief. Even the security guard looked stunned. Diane dropped the torn pieces onto the counter. Then she folded her arms. "People like you," she said loudly enough for the entire lobby to hear, "don't walk into this bank carrying a $3 million check." The room fell silent. Elijah slowly looked down at the torn pieces. Then, without saying a word, he bent to pick up the first piece, and then the second, carefully placing each one back into his weathered leather folder. His movements were calm, measured, almost peaceful. When he finally stood again, he looked directly into Diane's eyes. His voice never rose above a conversation. "I hope," he said quietly, "that you remember this moment." Diane laughed. It wasn't nervous laughter. It was the sharp, confident laugh of someone convinced she had already won. "You think I'm going to remember this?" She leaned both hands on the polished counter. "I'll remember another scammer who walked in here hoping a fake piece of paper would fool my employees." Elijah's expression never changed. "No," he answered quietly. "You'll remember the decision." Something about the way he said it irritated her more than anger would have. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't defending himself. He wasn't even trying to convince anyone. It felt as though he had already accepted whatever came next. Diane mistook that calm for surrender. "You heard me," she announced, her voice carrying across the lobby. "Leave the bank." Nobody spoke. The elderly woman, Elijah, had helped moments earlier, tightened both hands around her purse. The construction worker stopped filling out his deposit slip. Near the entrance, another customer slowly lowered his phone, then quietly lifted it again. This time the camera stayed pointed toward the counter. Natalie looked from the shredded pieces inside Elijah's leather folder back to her manager. Gianni. Her voice barely carried. It was a certified check. Diane never looked at her. And you're still in training. Natalie's cheeks flushed. I know what a certified instrument looks like. You know enough to do exactly what I tell you. The words landed harder than anyone expected. Natalie lowered her eyes. Not because she believed Diane, because arguing in front of customers could cost her job. Elijah noticed. His eyes rested on the young teller for only a second. Then they returned to Diane. You've embarrassed one employee already, he said. There is no reason to embarrass another. The sentence was calm, almost gentle. Somehow, that made it worse. Diane folded her arms. So now you're worried about my staff? I'm worried about everyone who will have to explain today. A murmur drifted through the waiting line. What does he mean? I don't know. But he doesn't sound scared. Security finally began walking toward the counter. His name tag read, Marcus. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s who had worked bank security for nearly 20 years. He stopped a respectful distance away. Is everything all right here? Diane answered before anyone else could. No. She pointed toward Elijah. This gentleman presented what appears to be a fraudulent check. Several heads turned. And when I refused to process it, she paused deliberately. He refused to leave. That wasn't true. Everyone standing nearby knew it. Elijah had never raised his voice, never stepped behind the counter, never even moved from where he had been standing. Marcus noticed that too. He looked at Elijah, then at the torn scraps inside the leather folder, then back at Diane. Sir? Marcus asked politely. Would you mind stepping outside while we sort this out? Elijah smiled. I don't mind stepping outside. He paused, but before I do, he reached into the folder, carefully removed one of the larger pieces of the torn check, and laid it gently on the counter. You may want to keep that. Diane frowned. Why? Because destroying a certified financial instrument tends to generate paperwork. A few customers exchanged glances. Marcus looked down at the paper. Even torn, the watermark was still visible. So was part of the issuing bank's seal. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. Natalie saw it. So did the elderly woman. Diane didn't. She pushed the torn piece back toward Elijah with one finger. I don't need your advice. No, Elijah replied softly. You need your records. The words hung in the air. For the first time, Diane felt something she refused to admit. Not fear. Not yet. Only the smallest flicker of uncertainty. She buried it immediately. I've had enough. She turned toward Marcus. Escort him out. Marcus hesitated. Only for a heartbeat. Mom? He said carefully. Should we at least verify the issuing bank first? Diane spun toward him. Are you questioning my judgment? I'm asking if we should follow procedure. My procedure is final. Silence settled over the lobby again. The television mounted above the waiting area continued reporting stock prices to a room where no one was listening anymore. Every eye remained fixed on the counter. Elijah slowly closed the leather folder. You still have time. Diane gave a short laugh. Time for what? To make a different decision. She shook her head. No. Elijah nodded once. I was hoping you'd say that. For the first time, those words didn't sound like confidence. They sounded like certainty. And somewhere near the back of the lobby, another customer quietly pressed the record button on their phone. Marcus didn't move. Not immediately. His eyes rested on Elijah's leather folder, then on the torn pieces resting inside it. Finally, he looked back at Diane. 20 years working security had taught him something that never appeared in any training manual. People who were lying usually talked too much. People who were afraid usually moved too fast. Elijah Brooks had done neither. He had answered every question, raised his voice at no one, threatened no one. Even now, after watching a $3 million certified check be torn apart in front of an entire lobby, his breathing hadn't changed. Marcus had seen angry customers. He had seen desperate customers. He had escorted out men who screamed, cursed, and pounded their fists against the glass. This man wasn't behaving like any of them. That bothered him. Diane mistook his silence for hesitation. What are you waiting for? Her voice snapped through the lobby. Escort him outside. Marcus swallowed. Yes, ma'am. He stepped closer to Elijah. His tone remained respectful. Sir. He spoke quietly enough that only Elijah could hear. If you would come with me. Elijah nodded almost immediately. Of course. No argument. No resistance. He slipped a weathered leather folder beneath his arm. The torn pieces stayed exactly where he had placed them. As Marcus reached out to guide him toward the entrance, Elijah leaned slightly closer. His voice was barely above a whisper. I hope this doesn't become your burden. Marcus blinked. I'm sorry. You were following instructions. A pause. Some instructions carry consequences. Marcus said nothing, but something tightened inside his chest. He had expected anger. Instead, he had been offered understanding that was somehow harder to carry. Together, they began walking across the polished marble floor. The lobby quietly parted before them. No one spoke. No one stepped into their path. Only phones continued recording. One customer lowered his eyes. Another pretended to study a brochure that had been upside down for nearly 2 minutes. The elderly woman, Elijah, had helped earlier, clutched her purse against her chest. When Elijah passed her, he gave the same small, courteous nod he had offered before. She tried to smile. Instead, her eyes filled with tears. She wasn't crying because of him. She was crying because she had watched kindness be mistaken for deception. Marcus noticed that too. With every step toward the front doors, his grip on Elijah's arm became lighter. Not enough for Diane to notice, just enough that Elijah could. Behind them, Natalie still stood frozen behind her terminal. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. She kept replaying the same thought. Certified checks have serial numbers, watermarks, verification codes. Every one of them could be confirmed with a single phone call. Why hadn't they made it? She looked toward Diane. Mom. Diane didn't turn around. What now? I really think we should contact the issuing bank before. I've already made my decision. But bank policy. My decision. Diane interrupted without looking at her. Is the policy in this branch? The words landed like a door slamming shut. Natalie lowered her head. Not because she agreed, because she suddenly understood something. The conversation had stopped being about procedure. It had become about pride. Near the entrance, Marcus and Elijah were only a few steps from the revolving doors. Outside, afternoon sunlight spilled across the sidewalk. Elijah stopped walking, not to resist, only to look through the glass one last time. He could still see Diane standing confidently behind the counter, still speaking with the certainty of someone who had never imagined being wrong. He thought of something his father used to say whenever neighbors argued over nothing. The hardest person to rescue is the one who believes they're already standing on solid ground. Marcus followed Elijah's gaze. You really aren't upset? Elijah smiled faintly. Oh, I'm disappointed. He paused, but disappointment passes. Marcus frowned, and the rest. Elijah looked back toward the lobby. The rest belongs to the people who chose today. Inside the bank, something shifted, not loudly, quietly. The construction worker, who had been waiting in line, stepped away from the counter, without saying a word. He walked over to Natalie. I saw everything. He placed a business card on the counter. If someone needs a witness, call me. A second customer approached. So did I. Then another. One after another. Without speeches, without drama. Names, phone numbers, business cards. Each one placed beside Natalie's keyboard. The stack grew slowly. Diane finally noticed. What exactly are all of you doing? No one answered. For the first time that afternoon, the room no longer felt like it belonged to her. It belonged to the truth. And truth, once enough people decide to protect it, has a way of becoming impossible to silence. Outside, Marcus opened the glass door. Elijah stepped onto the sidewalk. The warm afternoon breeze stirred the silver hair above his forehead. He looked toward his old pickup truck, then quietly reached into his jacket pocket. Not for revenge, not for a lawyer's business card, not even for a phone number. He removed a small notebook, opened it to a familiar page, and dialed a single number from memory. When the call was answered, his voice remained as calm as it had been all afternoon. Good afternoon. A brief pause. This is Elijah Brooks. Another pause. I'm at the Riverside Community Branch. His eyes drifted back, toward the bank. I believe it's time. Someone from the regional office came down. He listened for a moment, then added one final sentence, and I'd appreciate it if they came before anyone has the opportunity to rewrite what happened here. He ended the call, slipped the notebook back into his pocket, and quietly waited. Inside the bank, no one yet realized that the 14-minute countdown had just become very, very real. Inside Riverside Community Bank, no one noticed the clock, not because it had stopped, because every second suddenly felt heavier than the one before it. Diane Whitmore stood behind the customer service counter, with both arms folded, refusing to acknowledge the uneasy silence settling over her lobby. She had removed the problem. As far as she was concerned, the afternoon was over. She glanced toward Natalie. Next customer. No one stepped forward. The line remained exactly where it was. The construction worker looked down at the deposit slip in his hands, but made no effort to approach the counter. The elderly woman Elijah had helped earlier quietly shook her head. I'll wait. Another customer nodded. So will I. One by one, people chose not to continue. The lobby hadn't emptied. It had simply stopped. Diane forced a smile. Everyone, we appreciate your patience. Still, nobody moved. Only the soft hum of the air conditioning filled the room. Natalie looked toward the growing stack of business cards beside her keyboard. Witnesses, real witnesses. People willing to say exactly what they had seen. She swallowed hard. What now? The customers are offering statements. There won't be any statements. Natalie hesitated. They watched everything. They watched me protect this bank. Marcus had just stepped back inside after seeing Elijah onto the sidewalk. He quietly closed the glass doors behind him. His eyes met Natalie's for only a moment. Neither of them spoke. Neither needed to. Both were thinking the same thing. This wasn't over. Not even close. Outside, Elijah stood beside his old pickup truck. He didn't lean against it. He didn't pace. He simply rested one hand on the weathered leather folder tucked beneath his arm. Inside were the torn pieces of a certified check worth $3 million. To anyone else, they looked like scraps of paper. To Elijah, they were evidence. Across the parking lot, cars continued pulling in and out. People walked past without realizing that one ordinary bank branch was quietly moving toward a decision none of its employees could undo. His phone remained silent. He wasn't worried. People who kept their promises rarely needed reminders. Inside, Diane straightened a stack of brochures that didn't need straightening. She adjusted a pen that was already perfectly aligned. Tiny movements. Anything to convince herself everything was back under control. Then, the phone on her desk rang. She answered confidently. Riverside Community Bank. This is branch manager Diane Whitmore. A brief pause. Yes. Another pause. No. Everything is under control. Marcus looked up. Natalie did too. Neither could hear the voice on the other end, but they watched Diane's expression carefully. It was a fraudulent instrument. She smiled. No, there was no need to verify it. Another pause. Her smile became slightly tighter. Yes, I'm certain. She listened again, then answered, more quietly. No, he has already left. The call ended. Natalie frowned. Who was that? Diane placed the receiver down carefully. Operations. Marcus wasn't convinced. Operations rarely called branch managers directly over routine incidents. Not this quickly. Before anyone could say another word, the front doors opened again. A young man in a navy business suit entered carrying a leather laptop bag. He walked directly toward the reception desk. Good afternoon. His voice was calm. I'm looking for branch manager Diane Whitmore. She smiled immediately. That's me. He handed her a sealed envelope. Express delivery. She signed for it without thinking. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Her eyes skimmed the first line. Her smile faded almost instantly. Natalie noticed. Marcus noticed too. What is it? Natalie asked. Diane folded the paper before anyone else could read it. Nothing. She slipped it into a drawer. But Marcus had already seen the letterhead. Regional Administration. His stomach tightened. Outside, Elijah looked toward the entrance. The courier exited a few moments later, without saying a word. Elijah smiled, almost imperceptibly. Right on time. He checked his watch. 9 minutes. Only 9 minutes had passed since he ended the phone call. He had expected the regional office to move quickly. He hadn't expected them to move this quickly. Inside the bank, the atmosphere had changed. Customers could feel it. Nobody knew why, but everyone sensed that something important was approaching. Even Diane felt it. Though she refused to admit it, she walked back behind her desk and opened the drawer again. The letter contained only one sentence. Regional Director Thomas Reynolds is en route to Riverside Community Bank. Preserve all documentation related to today's customer incident. No explanation. No questions. No request for clarification. Only an instruction. Preserve all documentation. Her confidence slipped for the first time that afternoon. She looked toward the wastebasket. It was empty. Then her eyes drifted toward Elijah's torn check. Or rather, the pieces she had thrown back at him. For the first time, she realized she no longer had them. A strange feeling settled in her chest. Not panic. Not yet. Only the uncomfortable realization that every piece of evidence had just walked out the front door. Inside an old leather folder, carried by a man she had dismissed because of his worn jacket. Marcus quietly walked toward the entrance and looked through the glass. Elijah was still there, standing beside his faded pickup, waiting. Not pacing, not making phone calls, not speaking to reporters, just waiting. Marcus had spent 20 years reading people, and suddenly, he understood something that made the back of his neck go cold. People waited like that, only when they already knew exactly who was coming next. And somewhere in the distance, the low rumble of a black executive sedan turned into the bank's parking lot. The countdown had reached its final minutes. The black executive sedan rolled to a smooth stop directly in front of Riverside Community Bank. Nobody inside the lobby missed it. The driver stepped out first. Then the rear passenger door opened. A tall man in a charcoal suit climbed out with the calm confidence of someone who never needed to announce his authority. Regional Director Thomas Reynolds. Marcus recognized him immediately. So did Diane. The color drained from her face. She hurried toward the entrance, forcing a smile that felt tighter with every step. Mr. Reynolds. She reached the doors before he entered. I appreciate you coming so quickly. There was a customer creating a disturbance, but the situation has already been handled. Thomas didn't answer. His eyes moved past her. Across the parking lot, they settled on Elijah Brooks, standing quietly beside his faded pickup truck. Without hesitating, Thomas walked straight past Diane, not around her, past her, as though she weren't even there. The lobby watched in complete silence. The revolving doors turned once, twice. Then Thomas stepped onto the sidewalk. Elijah looked up. A gentle smile crossed his face. Good afternoon, Thomas. The regional director extended both hands. Good afternoon, sir. Every sound inside the lobby disappeared. Natalie's mouth fell open. Marcus stopped breathing for a second. The construction worker slowly lowered his pen. Even Diane stood frozen halfway through another explanation she would never finish. Sir? The word echoed louder than any shout. Thomas shook Elijah's hand with unmistakable respect. I'm sorry it took 14 minutes. Elijah smiled faintly. You came when I asked. I came the moment I heard your name. Thomas glanced toward the leather folder tucked beneath Elijah's arm. May I? Elijah handed it to him. Thomas opened it carefully. Inside, the torn pieces of the certified check rested exactly as Elijah had arranged them. Thomas stared at them for several long seconds. When he finally looked up, his face had hardened. Who did this? Elijah answered without emotion. The branch manager. Thomas closed the folder slowly. And the witnesses. They're inside. He nodded once. Good. Without another word, he turned and walked back toward the bank. This time, every employee stood a little straighter. Every customer watched every step. Thomas entered the lobby. He didn't remove his coat. He didn't greet anyone. He walked directly to the center of the marble floor. His voice remained calm. I'd like everyone to remain exactly where they are. No one moved. Thomas looked toward Natalie. You were the teller who first received the check? Yes, sir. Did you verify it? I examined it. Did you believe it was authentic? Yes. Did you recommend verification? I did. And were you allowed to complete that verification? Natalie's eyes drifted toward Diane. No, sir. Thomas nodded. He turned toward Marcus. You were the responding security officer.
Yes, sir.
Did Mr. Brooks threaten anyone? No. Did he refuse to leave? Marcus swallowed. No, sir. Did he become aggressive? No. Thomas's questions came one after another. Each answer chipped away at the story Diane had been trying to build. Finally, Thomas faced her. Gianni. She forced another smile. Mr. Reynolds, if you'll just allow me to explain. He raised one hand, not angrily, simply enough to stop her. Explain one thing. She nodded eagerly. Of course. Why was a certified financial instrument destroyed before its authenticity was verified? Silence. Diane opened her mouth, closed it again, then tried another answer. I was following protocol. Thomas looked at her for several seconds. So, he said quietly, you want your final explanation to be protocol? Yes. It was my responsibility to protect the bank. Thomas nodded once. Finish that sentence. She blinked. I'm sorry. You said you were protecting the bank. He waited. Finish the sentence. Every customer listened. Every employee watched. Diane searched for the right words. They looked suspicious. Thomas didn't respond. She tried again. The customer fit several warning signs, and I believed. No. His voice remained calm. I didn't ask what you believed. Another long silence. I asked why you destroyed bank property belonging to a customer before a single verification procedure had been completed. She couldn't answer. Not with Marcus standing there. Not with Natalie watching. Not with dozens of customers holding up phones. Not after realizing every word she spoke could be compared against multiple recordings. Her voice cracked. I was trying to protect everyone. Thomas looked toward the customers gathered around the lobby, then back at her. Protection doesn't require humiliation. His eyes shifted briefly toward the leather folder in his hands. Protocol doesn't require tearing up a customer's certified check. Another pause. And nowhere in this company's policies. His voice became quieter. Does it authorize judging a person's honesty by the age of his jacket? No one spoke. Somewhere near the waiting chairs, one customer whispered, Oh my God. Another nodded slowly. The whole story just fell apart. Thomas crouched to one knee. He opened the leather folder again. One by one, he carefully gathered the loose fragments that had slipped deeper into the pocket. No one offered to help. Not because they didn't want to. Because everyone understood what he was doing. He wanted the room to watch. He wanted every person present to understand that dignity sometimes meant kneeling to pick up what someone else's pride had thrown to the floor. When he stood again, he held the pieces gently in both hands. Then he faced the entire lobby. Every one of you witnessed what happened today. His voice carried through the silent bank. Not one person asked whether this check had been verified. He looked toward Natalie. One employee did. His eyes moved across the room. Remember that. Natalie's eyes filled with tears. Thomas turned to Marcus. Marcus. Yes, sir. Remain at the entrance. Marcus straightened. Yes, sir. When corporate investigators arrive, you'll give them a complete statement. I will. Then Thomas faced Diane. His expression never changed. Diane Whitmore. She swallowed hard. Yes. Sir. My office. Hope flickered across her face. Thank you. I can explain everything privately. Thomas shook his head. No. The single word echoed through the marble lobby. You chose to make this public. He stepped closer. So the consequences will begin in public. Diane's hands started trembling. The confidence that had filled her voice only minutes earlier was gone. In its place, for the first time that afternoon, was fear. Fear didn't arrive all at once. It settled over Diane Whitmore, the way winter settles over a field. Quietly, 1 degree at a time, until everyone could feel it. Thomas Reynolds didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The silence around him carried more authority than shouting ever could. He looked toward Marcus. Please lock the front doors. Several customers glanced at one another, not because they wanted to leave, because they suddenly realized no one wanted to miss what happened next. Marcus nodded once.
Yes, sir.
The heavy glass doors clicked. No one complained. Phones remained lowered now. People had stopped recording for entertainment. They were recording history. Thomas turned toward Natalie. The transaction log. She understood immediately. Her fingers moved across the keyboard. Within seconds, the screen displayed every action connected to Elijah's visit. Every timestamp, every employee login, every cancelled verification, every interruption. Nothing had disappeared. Bank systems rarely forgot. Thomas studied the screen. Then he asked quietly, "Who cancelled the authentication request?" Natalie swallowed. I never got the chance to send it." Thomas looked up. "So the verification never failed?" "No, sir." "It never began?" "No, sir." The words landed heavily across the lobby. A certified check hadn't been rejected. It had never been examined. That difference mattered, more than most people realized. Thomas slowly faced Diane again. "You told everyone you protected this bank?" "Yes." He nodded. "From what?" She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. He waited. "So let's try again. What exactly did you protect?" No answer. Only the quiet hum of computers. Across the lobby, the construction worker shifted his weight. The elderly woman Elijah had helped wiped at the corner of one eye. Even customers who had arrived halfway through the incident now understood something important. This had never been about the money. It had become about judgment. Thomas placed Elijah's leather folder gently on the counter. He rested one hand on top of it. "Do you know why certified checks exist?" Diane stared at the floor. "They exist because trust can be verified." Another pause. "They exist so employees don't have to guess." His eyes never left her. "You guessed." No one moved. "You guessed. And then you acted as though your guess carried more authority than the bank's own procedures." The sentence seemed to echo long after he finished speaking. Diane finally found her voice. "I thought I was making the safest decision." Thomas nodded slowly. "I believe you." Hope flickered across her face, then disappeared. "That," he continued quietly, "is what makes this even more serious." She frowned. "I don't understand."
I know.
He looked around the lobby, because if this had been done out of malice, we would only have one problem. His eyes returned to her. But this was done with complete confidence. And confidence without discipline becomes dangerous. No one interrupted him, not even the customers. Thomas turned toward Marcus. When Mr. Brooks was asked to leave, Marcus stood straighter. "Yes, sir." "Did he argue?" "No." "Did he insult anyone?" "No." "Did he threaten legal action?" Marcus thought back. "No, sir." "What did he say?" Marcus hesitated, then repeated the sentence exactly as he remembered it. He said, "I hope this doesn't become your burden." The room fell silent again. Thomas closed his eyes for a brief second. When he opened them, there was disappointment in them, not anger. Disappointment. He was thinking about your employee, while your employee was escorting him out. No one missed the contrast. Natalie looked down. Marcus swallowed hard. The customers exchanged quiet glances. People remembered moments like that, not because they were loud, because they revealed character. Thomas walked slowly toward the customer waiting area. Every step forced the room to follow him with their eyes. He stopped beside the elderly woman Elijah had helped earlier. "Mom." "Mom." She looked up. "Yes. I understand Mr. Brooks assisted you before any of this happened." "He did." "Would you tell us what happened?" She nodded. "My purse wouldn't open." Her voice trembled. "My husband usually helps me." She smiled sadly. "But he passed away last year." A few customers lowered their eyes. "This gentleman," she continued, "opened it for me." He smiled. "He wished me a good afternoon." And then he walked away. She looked toward Diane. "I remember thinking, what a kind man." A long pause filled the room. Then she added softly, "I've been wondering ever since, what exactly looked dangerous about kindness." No one answered, because no one could. Thomas thanked her with a nod. Then he looked across the lobby. "There is something every employee in this branch needs to understand." His voice remained steady. "Policies exist to protect people. They are never meant to replace thinking." He looked at Natalie. "You followed procedure." She nodded carefully. He looked at Marcus. "You questioned procedure when something didn't feel right." Marcus nodded. Then Thomas faced Diane. "You replaced procedure with assumption." The difference between those three decisions was now standing in plain sight for everyone to see. Outside, Elijah Brooks remained beside his old pickup truck. He hadn't checked his watch in several minutes. He simply watched sunlight reflect from the bank's front windows. He knew what was happening inside, not because anyone had told him, because truth always took the same path. First, people defended it. Then, they admitted it. Finally, they documented it. And once something reached paper, it became much harder to bury. Inside the bank, Thomas reached into his jacket and removed his phone. He dialed a number from memory. The call lasted less than 20 seconds. When he ended it, he slipped the phone back into his pocket. Diane looked up hopefully. Who was that? Thomas answered without emotion. Corporate compliance. Her stomach tightened. They're sending investigators? They're already on their way. He paused. And they're not coming because of the check. She stared at him. They're coming because of everything that happened after it. For the first time that afternoon, Diane Whitmore understood a painful truth. Tearing up the check hadn't been the moment that would end her career. It had simply been the first domino. Everything she said afterward, every instruction she gave, every procedure she ignored, every witness she dismissed, had quietly built the case against her. And the hardest part was realizing no one else had built it. She had. Thomas Reynolds slipped his phone back into his jacket. No one asked another question. They already knew. The answer would only make things worse. Outside, the afternoon sun reflected against Elijah's old pickup truck. He stood exactly where he had been standing for nearly 15 minutes. One hand rested lightly on the weathered leather folder. The other remained inside his jacket pocket. He wasn't waiting for justice anymore. Justice had already walked through the front doors. Now, he was simply waiting for people to finish choosing who they wanted to become. Inside the lobby, a silence settled over Riverside Community Bank, unlike anything Marcus had experienced in 20 years. Not the silence of fear, the silence of reflection. People had stopped looking at Diane. Instead, they found themselves replaying the afternoon from the beginning. The first accusation, the first assumption, the first opportunity to slow down that no one had taken. Thomas finally looked toward Natalie. Print everything. She nodded immediately. The transaction history, the security timestamps, the authentication request, the employee activity log, and every camera angle covering this lobby. Natalie's fingers moved across the keyboard. The printers behind the customer service desk immediately came to life. One page, then another, then another. The sound filled the room. Each sheet represented something no opinion could change. Facts. Bank systems didn't care about appearances. They recorded everyone the same way. Thomas watched the pages stacked neatly inside the printer tray. This, he said quietly, is why records matter. He turned toward the customers. Memory fades. Evidence doesn't. Nobody argued. Nobody could. Diane stood motionless. Every printed page sounded louder than the one before it. Not because of the paper. Because every sheet reminded her that nothing she had done had disappeared. It had all been preserved. Exactly as it happened. Marcus shifted slightly near the entrance. He had escorted thousands of people out of buildings during his career. Most of them angry. Some embarrassed. A few dangerous. Today, he realized something that would stay with him long after retirement. The most powerful person he'd ever escorted had been the only one who never resisted. Thomas noticed him. Marcus. Yes, sir. When this investigation is over, I'd like you to write one more report. Marcus looked surprised. What kind of report? Thomas answered quietly. One that isn't required. Marcus frowned. I don't understand. I want you to write down what you learned today. Marcus blinked. For training. Thomas nodded. For people who haven't made this mistake yet. Marcus slowly smiled. I can do that. I know you can. Across the lobby, the elderly woman, Elijah, had helped earlier quietly walked toward the counter. She reached into her purse. This time, she opened it without difficulty. She removed a folded handkerchief, carefully dried her eyes. Then she looked at Thomas. May I ask something? Of course. Is that gentleman going to receive an apology? Thomas followed her gaze toward the front windows. Elijah was still standing beside his truck. He remained completely unaware that everyone inside was looking at him. Thomas answered after a long pause. I believe he deserves one. The elderly woman smiled sadly. No. Thomas looked back at her. He deserved it before any of this happened. The words settled gently over the room. No one disagreed, because she was right. An apology, after humiliation, could acknowledge the wrong, but it could never erase the moment itself. Thomas looked toward Diane. I'd like you to come outside. She hesitated. Now? No. She swallowed. For the first time all afternoon, she wasn't being asked. She was being instructed. Marcus unlocked the front doors. The afternoon air drifted into the lobby. Thomas stepped outside first. Diane followed several paces behind. The customers watched through the glass. No one spoke. Even traffic beyond the parking lot seemed strangely distant. Elijah turned as they approached. His expression remained exactly the same. A calm, patient. Thomas stopped a few feet away. Mr. Brooks, I believe someone owes you something. He stepped aside, leaving Diane standing alone. For several long seconds, she couldn't lift her eyes. Her hands remained clasped tightly in front of her. Finally, she spoke. I judged you. Her voice barely carried across the sidewalk. I decided who you were before I knew your name. She looked down. I ignored procedure. I embarrassed my staff. I embarrassed this bank. And her voice broke. I embarrassed myself. Another long silence. I am truly sorry. No one moved. The words hung in the warm afternoon air. Elijah studied her quietly, not searching for weakness, searching for honesty. When he finally spoke, his voice was as gentle as it had been inside the bank. I believe that you're sorry. Diane closed her eyes. relief mixed with shame. Then Elijah continued. But the apology isn't the hardest part. She looked up. The hardest part, he said softly, is becoming the person who would never do it again. Those words landed deeper than any punishment Thomas could have given, because they demanded something no investigation could require. Change. Real change. Thomas watched both of them in silence. He had spent decades leading people. He knew policies could correct behavior, but only character could prevent it from happening again. Elijah adjusted the weathered leather folder beneath his arm. The check can be reissued. Thomas nodded. Yes. The paper wasn't the valuable part. No. Elijah looked back toward the bank. The opportunity was. His eyes drifted across the lobby windows. He could see Natalie, Marcus, the customers, people who had witnessed everything. I just hope, he said quietly, that none of them waste what today taught them. Thomas followed his gaze. Inside, Natalie stood holding the stack of freshly printed records against her chest. She wasn't looking at the paperwork. She was looking at Elijah. Years from now, she would train new tellers. She would teach them how to verify signatures, how to process certified instruments, how to detect fraud. But before any of those lessons, she would tell them about one ordinary Thursday. The day she learned that the first responsibility of banking wasn't protecting money. It was treating people with enough dignity to let the facts speak before assumptions did. And that lesson would outlive every piece of paper printed that afternoon. Thomas watched Elijah walk toward his old pickup truck. The leather folder rested beneath his arm once again. Lighter now. Not because it contained less paper, because it no longer carried uncertainty. The certified check could be issued again. Character could not. Elijah opened the driver's door, then paused. He looked back one last time. Through the bank's tall windows, he could still see movement inside. Natalie was helping another customer. Marcus had returned to his place by the entrance. Thomas was speaking quietly with several employees. Life was already beginning to move again, just differently. That, Elijah thought, was how real change usually happened. Not with applause. With ordinary people making one better decision after another. He climbed into the pickup. The engine took 2 tries before it started. It always had. He smiled to himself. Some things didn't need replacing just because they showed their age. He drove home the same way he always did. No celebration. No interviews. No phone calls telling everyone what had happened. The road was familiar. The radio still faded in and out whenever he crossed the old railroad tracks. He didn't bother adjusting it. When he reached home, he changed into an old pair of work boots and walked into the backyard. The tomato plants needed water. They had needed it before he went to the bank. They still needed it now. He filled a watering can, moved slowly down each row. The evening breeze carried the smell of damp soil through the garden. It reminded him of something his father used to say. The world changes because somebody keeps doing the right thing after everyone else has gone home. He had never fully understood those words as a boy. He understood them now. The following Sunday, Elijah sat in the same church pew he had occupied for years. No one there knew about the check, or the manager, or the investigation. To them, he was simply Elijah Brooks, the man who always arrived a little early, who shook hands at the door, who never hurried through conversations. That was enough for him. Across town, Riverside Community Bank opened Monday morning under different circumstances. Customers were greeted before they reached the counter. Every certified check was verified exactly the way policy required. Every concern was documented. Every employee had been reminded that procedures existed for moments when appearances tempted people to make assumptions. Natalie helped open 3 new accounts before lunch. Each customer received the same smile, the same patience, the same respect. Marcus noticed something else. People were looking at one another a little longer before making judgments. It wasn't dramatic. Most good changes never are. Thomas Reynolds kept his promise. The training developed from that Thursday afternoon didn't stay at Riverside. It was shared across every branch under his supervision. Not because one mistake defined a bank, but because one lesson could improve it. Diane Whitmore's career would be decided through the company's process, not through gossip, not through headlines. Thomas insisted on that too. Accountability meant telling the truth, not humiliating people. Weeks later, a replacement certified check arrived. This time it was deposited without hesitation. The transaction lasted less than 5 minutes, exactly as it should have the first time. $3 million entered Elijah's account. The receipt was printed, folded once, placed inside the same weathered leather folder. No speeches, no audience, just a bank doing its job. Sometimes, that is the most remarkable ending of all. Because dignity isn't measured by the size of a check. It's measured by whether someone is treated like a human being before anyone knows what's inside the envelope they carry. I made Elijah Brooks up, but I did not make up the feeling of walking into a room and realizing someone has already decided who you are before you've spoken a single word. Too many people know that feeling. What stays with me isn't that Elijah eventually received respect. It's that he never demanded it. He simply refused to surrender his own. He didn't answer humiliation with humiliation. He answered it with patience, and he trusted that the truth if given enough time, could stand on its own. So let me ask you something. If you had been standing inside that lobby that afternoon, would you have looked away? Or would you have been the person who quietly said, "Let's verify the facts first"? Sometimes history doesn't change because someone shouts the loudest. Sometimes it changes because one person chooses fairness before assumption. And those quiet choices have a way of reaching farther than we ever imagine.